Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Wareham Sewer Commission. Today is January, good golly. September 21st, 6:30 PM. We are in the Town Hall, room 27. And may I have a roll call, please?
Pete Dunlap,
Bob Scanlon.
Sandy Slavin.
And Bernie Pigeon. 400, we have a quorum. This evening, we're going to focus on one issue, and that is the comprehensive wastewater management planning project. That is a critical project that we have to perform that allows us to be eligible for many of the grants that we apply for. And we have a presentation by our consultants, GHD, with Mark and Anastasia. And it's the only issue on our agenda. And I might say that we welcome Sandy Slavin. She had a personal injury, and she was in rehab and is joining us via Zoom. And hopefully Mr. Gilberti will also be able to join us. He also had a medical emergency today, and the proviso has been set up for him to join us whenever he's available. But I'll allow the GHD to take over the meeting and do their presentation.
Thank you. So I'm Anastasia Rudenko. I'm an environmental engineer with GHD, and I'm here with Mark Drinville from GHD to talk about the Wareham Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan. I'm going to start today giving a project background and then focus on the development of the needs assessment. So how we established the projected needs for Wareham for a 20-year planning period to manage both wastewater and nitrogen. And then give a small update on the alternatives analysis, which is the step that we're currently working on, and then finish with next steps for the project. So the town of Wareham has completed a CWMP. The original one was done in 2002, and it was done for a 20-year planning horizon. That document focused primarily on sewering portions of the town that couldn't sustain an on-site septic system. So it had bad soils or high groundwater. And those areas, the majority of them have been implemented. The mechanical equipment that was put in as part of those recommendations has a 20-year design life. So now as we're looking at our next 20-year planning period, we're looking at replacing that equipment and then also looking at additional needs for the towns that have come up in the next 20 years and to address the current sewer moratorium, as well as the findings of the Massachusetts Estuaries Project and the waters that are listed on the 303D, or the integrated list of waters, which shows nitrogen impaired waters. So overall, the CWMP process has 3 major steps. The first is the needs assessment, and that's where we work with the town to look at what are the projected wastewater and nitrogen management needs for the 20-year planning period. So for this project, we're looking 2025 to 2045. The next step is the alternatives analysis, where we look at what different alternatives can be used to meet those identified needs. And those will be screened, costed out to identify the most cost-effective solution, which will become a recommended plan. And that recommended plan will include the recommended wastewater infrastructure projects to be implemented over the next 20 years, the proposed phasing schedule, and the proposed financial plan for those projects. And as I go through this presentation, if anybody has questions, please feel free to ask them as we go through instead of waiting for the end. So as we've been working through the needs assessment, we've been meeting with the CWMP advisory group, which is composed of different representatives of Wareham offices, boards, and committees to get their input to establish the needs, and we'll continue to work with them through the CWMP process. So the first step of our project is to establish the wastewater flows for the 20-year planning horizon. When we look at these flow projections, we're looking to meet needs. We need to continue to treat the existing centralized wastewater flows that are going to the existing facility. We need to accommodate flows that have been committed by the town to go to that facility. And then we need to look at environmental needs. how much nitrogen needs to be taken out of the watershed, converted from septic to sewer in order to meet the town's draft TMDL. We want to make sure that we're looking to the end of our 20-year projection, so we're looking at what is the anticipated population for the planning period, and then we also need to meet the town's housing needs, identified economic needs, and identified public health needs. In order to establish the existing flow, we worked with influent flow data, and then also worked with the town to identify what flows have already been committed to come to the plant, and those are included as allowances in our flow estimates. In terms of environmental needs, there are multiple studies that are showing that excessive nitrogen to Wareham waters are causing coastal water degradation. That was not a question, right? So there's multiple waters that are listed on Massachusetts Integrated List of Waters, also known as the 303D list, which is a list maintained by the state that outlines the waters that will require a total maximum daily load for nitrogen. So it's a maximum concentration, or a concentration that needs to be maintained in the watershed to have a healthy ecosystem. There's been one watershed that's moved forward with the Massachusetts Estuaries Project report, which quantifies where the nitrogen comes from, and that's the graph that's shown in the right. What that report shows is the majority of the controllable nitrogen is coming from septic systems. So in order to meet that goal that's set in the TMDL, we need to remove septic nitrogen from the watershed. And a draft TMDL has recently been issued for the Wareham River, which is currently under review.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
You say that the primary nitrogen source is septic system, not necessarily the plant.
No, septic system. So the Massachusetts Estuary Project, and there is the treatment facility. So there is load coming from that also, but the larger source is septic. And when we come up with our plan, we account for the fact that there is effluent nitrogen coming out of the river.
Okay, but do we test before the outfall pipe at the plant? So we know how much nitrogen is in the river?
Yes, yes. So as part of their permit requirements, they need to test for
Okay.
effluent nitrogen. And for the Massachusetts Estuaries Project report, there's multiple testing locations within the Wareham River.
Well,
So you can monitor.
I asked this question at the last meeting,
Yes,
and obviously I was misunderstood because they were testing below the outfall pipe.
they test before it goes into the river.
Wait a minute,
So-
who you're asking?
I asked Guy.
Well, there's your
Where-
answer. You ain't gonna get an honest answer out of that guy.
So the treatment plant
Please
tests,
refrain from
Yes.
those
so the
remarks.
treatment plant does their own testing, so they know,
Yes,
for
but
permit reasons.
what I want to know is what's in the river before the outfall pipe. And he told us what's in the river at the bridge by Nazraeli's, which is below the outfall pipe. So that really doesn't do us any good.
Is that the Sentinel? Do you know where that is?
So I want to test before the outfall pipe.
He's looking before and after.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. There's multiple stations where testing is conducted. I believe there's one before, but I'll double check that.
Where?
So there's multiple sampling stations. For the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, they took samples in multiple parts of the river that they used to calibrate the model that was used to establish the TMDLs.
Okay.
Yeah.
But would you,
I can verify that.
okay,
yes.
that's what I was getting at. Thank you.
So overall, Wareham has 4 watersheds. The Weweantic River, which has been identified as nitrogen impaired, but has not had a scientific evaluation started that would lead to a TMDL. The Wareham River, which has had the MEP report conducted and has a draft TMDL. Onset Bay, which at this point is not identified as nitrogen impaired, and Buttermilk Bay, which is nitrogen impaired but has not had a scientific evaluation started. When we look at the environmental needs as part of the CWMP, we base our analysis as a starting point on the data that was used to develop the MEP report. That's looking at a watershed basis. We start with that data and then we isolate what is the estimated load coming out of Wareham. So when we're looking at our plan, we're looking to control Wareham's portion to meet the TMDL, not the whole watershed.
If I could add, when we talked about this a month ago at one of the sewer commission meetings, that was a question that came up. So you're not responsible for Plymouth's load or Carver's load that might be in that watershed. You're only responsible for what's coming out in Wareham,
Which is why I asked the question I did.
about where they're testing.
Because I want to test before the outfall pipe, upriver.
And the other adjustment that's made, the MEP report was done before a lot of the sewering that has been done in Wareham was implemented. So we adjusted for that septic to sewer conversion. We're taking that out of the septic load that's being projected to go to the river. And then also, we looked at population growth subsequent to the work. So we added population growth and we took out septic load that has already been taken out by the sewer system to adjust it to reflect today's conditions. And that's how we come up with the septic removal that's required to meet Wareham's load. And then we look at the projections for the 20-year planning period to get to 2045. Does that make sense, or does anybody have any questions on how we adjusted the septic loads?
So the original report is from 2014, is that right?
Yes, but the data is older.
And the data's old, okay. So we used the old data but updated it. Well, that's the point of this.
And then for the Ruby-Antic River and Buttermilk Bay, we know that there will need to be septic to sewer conversion. But since no scientific evaluations have been started, we don't have a target concentration or a target load that we need to remove. So what we're doing is we're carrying an allowance when we look at the configurations for the centralized wastewater treatment facility. So it's anticipated that that infrastructure will likely be built after the 20-year planning period, but we want to plan for it now and make sure there's flexibility on the site to accommodate the additional wastewater treatment equipment that will be needed for that load. We work with the health agent in Wareham to identify areas that have public health needs. So these are areas with high rates of septic failures. And the majority of them are also in the Wareham River watershed. So by sewering them, you're both addressing a public health need and also addressing a nitrogen management need. For population projections, we worked with UMass Donahue Institute projections to come up with an estimate of how many additional people will be in the town at the end of the planning period and converted that to an estimated nitrogen load.
Excuse me, can you go back to that chart?
Yeah.
The 2020 population, now the latest census has it set approximately 25,000 currently.
All right, and this is showing it as just under.
But your 2045 goes up to 26.6, which is only about 1,000 over a 20-year period.
And so that's based on the Wareham specific projections from UMass Donahue Institute.
Well, when we installed the sewer, we had 11,000, currently running at 25, more than double over a 50-year period. And if we're 25 now by census, as recorded by town clerk's office, then you're, in the next 22 years, you're only going up 1,500. I think we procreate a lot faster than that.
Yeah, and in a recent working group discussion, we did talk about how Wareham is trending higher than the
Yes,
average in
yeah.
Massachusetts. All of the numbers that I'm presenting today are draft numbers, so as we get comments, we'll revise the numbers going forward. Did you have something you want to add? No?
I guess one thing I'll add is that you know, we use information that we can get access to for population. You know, I'm trying to resolve what you're saying with what the state population projections are.
They've always underestimated the growth of, for some reason or other, Wareham has always been greater than the state average.
I will say that that's just one piece of the puzzle. You know, Anastasia's gonna talk about other things that, other components of where you could get additional flow that could cover some of what might be missing from that. So that's just one piece.
But when you get this additional flow, are you converting that, do you have some sort of a way to decide how much more nitrogen that's going to produce? I mean, could you say how many people produce X amount of nitrogen?
Yes, based on average flows for the town.
Yep.
So we first look at what would that be in septic load, if everybody was on a septic system, and then where are the most logical sewer extensions to bring the highest concentration of septic to sewer conversion to meet those TMDLs. So it is town-specific data that we're using. And one layer of conservatism that we have in those calculations is we assume population projections are completely separate from the housing development goals. Realistically, some of that population would move into the housing developments, right? So that is adding additional that's one way we're adding additional population and accounting for that in these calculations.
And part of the reason for that is that, you know, when Anastasia will talk about the potential MBTA and housing surrounding that, population projections may not know some of the town-specific items, so, so we, you know, we do try and gather whatever information we can, you know, with that.
Yes, understood.
So we work with the town planner to identify the developments that are being used to meet the town's housing development goals, and are assuming all of those as growth within the next 20 years. And then we also work with the town planner to review other available planning documents, the economic development strategy, Wareham's master plan, Wareham's housing and assessment and production plan, and then their community development strategy. And then, as Mark mentioned, we have a separate allowance looking at how much flow is needed to meet the housing requirements to be an MBTA community.
Bernie,
Yes,
can you go back to the previous slide, please? Just to clarify it, it's Littleton Drive apartments. To be accurate, the next to the last project on your list, it's not Little Drive, it's Littleton Drive, to be accurate.
Thank you, we will update that. Thank you, Sandy. So, sure. Let's move this quickly. So what I've spoken about at
Boy, I wish we could do that.
are you holding your head because you're bounced around like that, Sandy?
I'm sorry, I'll stop. So what I've spoken up to now are considered known needs, right? They're based on planning documents and projections. On top of that, at this point, we're holding an allowance for undesignated growth. So this is our acknowledgement that we don't know everything that's going to happen in the next 20 years, and it provides the town with flexibility to provide flow for development that may not be identified at this point. So in these draft flow projections, we're carrying 400,000 gallons per day. And because not everybody thinks in gallons per day, we wanted to convert that into different types of developments. So each one of these is a separate item. So for example, that 400,000 gallons per day, if that was single family dwellings, that would be a little over 3,000 bedrooms. And then looking at restaurant seats, over 44,000 restaurant seats. So of course it would be a mix and a combination, but it's just a way to break down the flow to show approximately how much it is. Let me just move that again. So this is the summation of the different flows that we've discussed. So the total future flow to be managed, which includes the existing flows, is about 3.5 million gallons per day. And then I mentioned Wewiantic River and Buttermilk Bay do have nitrogen needs. So at this point, we're carrying a 500,000 gallon per day allowance as we're looking at the layouts and the sizing of equipment and infrastructure at the existing plant. Yeah.
So you're figuring by 2045, we're gonna be trying to put 3.5 million gallons
In
into the
addition
river?
to?
I will cover this a little bit later, if it all goes to the centralized plants. There's 3 different options we're looking at. Either it all goes to the centralized plant. Are there opportunities for remote facilities or satellite facilities? And are there opportunities for regional solutions? So sending it north to the Makepeace facility.
So
But
this-
overall, it would be 3.5 million gallons per day.
What's the Makepeace facility?
Makepeace in Plymouth, right across the border from Wareham, has a small wastewater treatment facility. They have a small allocation for Wareham flow, but there may be the opportunity to negotiate additional flow there.
But this is all the more reason why we should get to the canal.
Now, this 3.5 is inclusive of the existing 2?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And we will speak about the canal option. a
What
little
did you
later.
say, that's the increase?
No,
No,
that's
that's
total.
everything.
Total. It's our 2?
Yeah, so per,
Don't worry, we have EMS on call.
We just filled up the canal.
no, that's inclusive of what's already being treated, as well as the
Which is
commitments.
roughly $1 million.
Yes.
So sometimes we call this the total amount of wastewater that has to be managed within the town. It could ultimately go to your facility, your current facility, but it could go to multiple places. This is just the total, okay? So we have to look at, we're gonna be looking at, you know, different ways that you can manage this flow over time.
Well, I'm more concerned about where, not what we can, the amount we can handle. We can handle it. It's the outfall I'm
Yeah.
concerned with,
Yeah.
especially with that new report that came out for all of Cape Cod over the next 20 years. So groundwater discharge doesn't sound like it's going to be an option much longer.
That's
There are
possible.
Very limited sites.
That's one.
Yes, Sandy, you have your hand up?
Yes, Bernie, here, when we have 1 EDU per household, how many gallons per day do we include in that? I thought it was 330.
I thought it was 220. It's
Okay.
definitely been a variable.
Okay, can you go back a couple slides where you were looking at, I thought I saw 120?
Yes.
Right there, yeah.
Where we have an average 120 gallons per single-family dwelling, I think that's wicked low. When we're looking at probably 220 as our standard when we calculate a 1 EDU for a household. Am I missing something?
Well, that's 2.4 people.
Yes.
Well, per
yeah.
unit, as she
In the
said,
single-family home, you're putting 2.5 people, is the way they have their numbers figured out. So if you look at it that way, it's what,
It's what-
50?
well, when she
50
said,
gallons per person.
when it's indicated average GPD per unit, that's not per individual, that's per house,
Yes,
per,
yeah,
per
and
structure. So
Right,
that there
but
could
the
be 2.5.
but the single-family dwelling is 2.5 people.
Yes. So it should be upwards around over 200 versus the
So
120.
the 120 gallons per day is based on Wareham water use data, and it's also consistent with the water use that was used in the
Okay.
Massachusetts Estuaries Project, so we did check it 2 ways.
We arbitrarily, as an EDU,
Yeah,
counted as so many gallons. And I think that's where the confusion is
okay,
coming.
yeah,
Yeah,
So
we have,
you're actually using the data
Yes.
from the water department,
yes, yeah,
which we wanted, good, okay. That is, I agree.
all right, perfect. And Sandy, did you still have your hand up, or is that perfect? So the next step of the analysis, which we're currently working on, is to develop the alternatives that can be used to meet the wastewater needs that we just talked about. In terms of wastewater treatment, we just talked about this, but we're looking at 3 different alternatives. So treatment and expansion at the existing wastewater treatment facility, either to treat a portion or all of the needs. We're looking at opportunities for a remote treatment facility, and then opportunities for a regional solution. For effluent discharge, we're looking at, are there opportunities to increase the capacity at the plant's existing outfall, which would be a surface water discharge. We're looking at, are there opportunities for new discharge to groundwater, and then the ocean outfall. And for the collection system, we're looking at what are the most cost-effective areas for the proposed sewer extensions. For the purposes of the alternatives analysis, we're looking at the town in 2 different study areas, looking south of Route 490, yeah? All right, there you go. South of 495 and north of 495. And our preliminary analysis at this point is showing that about 2.5 to 3 million gallons per day will likely go to the existing plants. So one of the options that we're looking at is what would the layout be at the plant if all of the flow was brought to the existing plants. We're looking at it in million gallon per day increments.
Can I speak to this?
Yeah,
a
yeah,
little bit
sure.
more? So, I'll just point out a couple of things here. So the different colors show the different phases. So what we're looking at is potentially increasing the flow at this facility in increments of flow. So right now you can treat 1.5 MGD. So we could go up to 2 MGD in one step, we could go up to 3 MGD in another step, and 4 MGD in a final step. So it works in some flexibility as you look for other opportunities to manage wastewater flow. If it all had to come here, then this is what you could be looking at is increased facilities using all of these colors. The work that we're not here to talk about the warrant article for the design upgrades at the plant that's underway now, but the gray boxes here all show work that's under design right now, and you could just see how it works into the future plan. It's you know, part of the ultimate plan. So I just wanted to show that it's a phased upgrade is what we're looking at.
And we have the geography to handle the build-out,
Yes.
to accommodate the maximum as here we go.
That's right, and all of the facilities that exist now would either be reused in their current capacity or would find a different use for them. So there's a use for everything.
So that the phase 2 is really a foundation as the plan continues to expand. So Mark had mentioned the preliminary phasing. And so phase 1 has already been completed. That looked at addressing wastewater needs due to age. Phase 2, which is currently in design and the subject of the warrant article, will also address age-related needs and will be the foundation for the future facility expansion. Then there's a proposed expansion to 2 million gallons per day, 3 million gallons per day, and 4 million gallons per day. And in the next column, we have planning level cost estimates for each of the phases. And this is the work at the treatment plant itself. There will be additional projects that will be needed for discharge, for solids handling, and then for the collection system. And the costs for all of those are currently in development.
Mark, on the 2 million gallons a day, in the parentheses there, you say without storing raw wastewater. Is there a chance that if we did that, we have a slow period, we could treat more?
You would still be able to use, those lagoons are still gonna remain, and they could be used, but you wouldn't have to use them. Does that make sense, or? You're wondering if you could use them to increase the capacity of the
If we,
facility?
if we stored raw sewage,
Mhm.
is there a time when the plant is running at a lower capacity that then we could process it and still not go past our outfall limits?
So you could continue to use the same concept, right? You would shave your peaks with the EQ basins.
You could, we're trying to reduce the reliance on that, and I'll tell you why, it's because, it's really a wild card, because if you get, high flows, you've been at, you've pushed the limits of those lagoons in the past, and as the town grows.
So it's not a good idea to use it as a standard practice, because if we get in a heavy rainy season, we're in trouble.
Right, and as the town grows, you're gonna need more and more of those to accommodate flows, and that's why we're trying to transition you away so you become what's called a flow-through facility, and you don't have to rely on storing raw wastewater.
And that's, 2 MGD is actually our permit level versus our actual.
It's the design, but the permit
It's
is
our- it's our
1.56,
design limit,
so
yeah.
it's restricted by.
But I mean, as you're increasing the capability,
As we increase.
yeah,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
permit will
That would
increase
be-
also.
Yeah.
Yeah, and right now, we see a couple of avenues to get to 2 MGD. Right now, you're 1.5 MGD, thereabouts. We've had conversation, actually, you're gonna go into this, right? I'm
Sure.
sorry, I'm
No,
sorry.
no, that's fine,
Well, we see a couple of options to get to that,
Yeah.
so.
which we'll talk about in 1 second. So, and we just talked, these are the additional components that cost estimates are in development for.
Well, can you go back, just want to make sure, there, we showed costs for the treatment plant. I mean, there are other costs that are, and they're not insignificant. So, the plant's gonna have to have additional solids handling capacity.
All of that, yeah.
That's been a struggle for the facility because of issues in New England with disposing of sludge that, you've been hearing about lately. Effluent discharge, whether that's to groundwater or to an outfall, that's gonna be a cost. And then, sewer extensions and upgrades within the system that are just required, over time, so.
So I wanted to give an overview of the 3 different discharge options that we're looking at. The first is increased discharge at the existing facility to the Agawam River. Second is ocean outfall, and then discharge to groundwater. So as part of this project, we've had an initial meeting with DEP and EPA. The permitted capacity that can go to the Agawam River now is 1.56. So the conversation is what would be needed to increase that capacity. In order to do that, we would need to have an approved TMDL compliance plan that shows that we can offset the additional nitrogen to the Agawam River as part of our overall wastewater management plan, which is a plan that's being developed as part of this project. So it shows with that increased discharge, you can still meet your TMDL. As we look at our different options, there is some opportunity to offset some of that increased flow by reducing the effluent nitrogen concentration. So the facility currently has a permit level of 4 milligrams per liter that can go down to 3, which will shave off the nitrogen coming out, but it'll also require sewer offsets. As part of the permitting, we'll also need to do an anti-degradation analysis. So that looks at the environmental conditions in the river and make sure that it can sustain the additional nitrogen that would be contributed from the increased flow. And then we would go through a permit application with both Mass DEP and EPA for the increase, which may trigger the Interbasin Transfer Act.
This is something that we see as an avenue to potentially get to 2 MGD. That's why we were looking at different stages. This is a potential avenue to get to increase the flow to 2 MGD.
But if we're at 4 now, and we got to 2, can we double our outfall?
You would, so it's based on the results of the anti-degradation study. So hydraulically you can, but you have to make sure that the system can take that additional load.
So you're wondering if we can go from 2 MGD to 4 MGD?
You say we are at 4.
4 milligrams per liter, so that's the concentration
All
that's
right.
coming out.
And if we can get it down to 2, can we double our outfall?
If you, so 2 milligrams per liter is below the practical limit of technology. So you 3 milligrams per liter is generally accepted
All
as
right,
about
so
as.
if we go from 4 to 3, can we increase it by 25%?
That, from 1.56 to 2 MGD? The flow?
When you say we can't get to 2, it can't be done.
Yeah, no, we can't get to 2 milligrams per liter, but we can, by going from 4 to 3, as well as.
Well, my point is, if we can go from 4 to 3,
Yeah,
can we increase our outfall by 25%?
Is there a correlation between reducing one, we can increase the other?
There is a correlation.
Yeah.
The anti-degradation analysis will look at more than just nitrogen, so we do have to go through that also to make sure that the system can take it.
Oh.
But there will be a likely increase.
But the river would only be taking an increase in flow, not nitrogen.
Yes, but there's
Yes.
other constituents
Yes.
in that flow
But-
that we would want to evaluate, or that we would need to evaluate as part of the permit process.
but he is right. I mean,
Yes.
the goal is to not put more nitrogen in. That's the goal, yes.
Which is all the more reason to
Yes.
test prior to the outfall.
And we'll get you that answer.
Because if it's all fertilizer coming down from the plant, the cranberry bogs upstream, we shouldn't be taking the blame.
So for the ocean outfall, we work with Jim Churchill, who's a buoy scientist, to look at hydrodynamic modeling. We looked at the entire town of Wareham and did an initial screening based on a couple of key parameters. What are areas that are suitable for a potential ocean outfall? So the study looked at what are areas that are deep enough and have a strong enough current. Overall, the analysis showed that outside of the canal, there's relatively weak flows and it's relatively shallow. So really the most practical location for an ocean outfall would be at the canal. And that's shown a little better in the graphic to the right.
So not every place in the canal is as advantageous as another.
So the,
I mean, just if we get to the canal, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. We have to get to it in a certain location. And Mass Maritime is what you've found is the best.
Yeah, and the other driver that will come into play is also cost. Where is it most cost-effective to enter
Well,
into the
that's-
canal? And Mass Maritime is a very cost-effective
But
solution.
that's why if we stayed in Wareham and we didn't have to deal with any other town and we went out to Great Neck, it would all be in Wareham, all of the piping.
right.
Yes.
And we looked and we can't find a practical location to have an outfall. Something that will meet all of the factors that you're looking for to have a good spot.
Yeah, I think there's at least 3 environmental groups have told us that the Mass Maritime is the most ideal location.
Very high tidal currents.
Which is kind of hard to understand. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if you've ever been out there in that current,
Yeah, yeah, you watch it whipping back and forth. And beginning ambient water quality monitoring has been done in that area as an initial part of the permitting project, if that was to move forward. Our third option is to look, are there any viable sites for discharge to groundwater? So for this event analysis, we did an initial screening analysis to look throughout the town. What are potential available sites that are not in proximity to sensitive receptors such as wetlands, vernal pools, not in flood zones or zone 2 water protection areas. Once we limited to a limited number of sites, we've developed a refinement of the USGS regional model for Wareham, looking at these specific sites. And we're using that to assess how much flow could be discharged at these sites, where that nitrogen would migrate to, and what are the impacts of groundwater mounding to surface waters in the vicinity. We're also doing field investigations, so to look at the soil conditions to see if they're conducive for discharge, and those are happening this fall, starting next week.
Have you, our last conversation, our last meeting, it was mentioned that the property up behind the maintenance garage.
Yes. So I'm working with David Menard to see if we can also do the testing at that property.
Now, with those, if we went to a groundwater discharge, would it be limited to, would we have to get to the canal like within 20 years? That study that they did on the Cape makes it sound like groundwater discharge is not going to be acceptable within 20 years.
What's the study that you're referencing?
What was that report that we read that showed that all of the Cape had to be sewered, that they had to get away from septic systems?
I don't recall the study, Peter.
I think that's the
So
phase
this
one
is,
of the
this
TMDL.
is looking,
Excuse me?
after it's been sewered, this is a way to recharge the treated effluent. So it is a practice that's very common on the Cape.
Do you know what kind of discharge you're referring to?
I think it was, the Cape is phase one of the
Okay, it's the
TMDL.
Title V regs, okay,
Yep.
okay.
Were they getting away totally from groundwater or just untreated
They're getting away from septic systems.
septic systems?
Yep. So once you treat it at a wastewater treatment facility and
Then it
discharge
could-
it back into the
then it could be
groundwater,
groundwater
then it can be a
discharge.
groundwater discharge.
All right, thank you.
So this is an example of a treated effluent recharge. These are open sand beds, so it's a way to get a lot of water recharged. So basically what you see is sand. The water gets recharged through a small pipe and then percolates down to groundwater and migrates with groundwater to the surface water.
Sandy's question.
Yes, Sandy?
You're
I'm
on
sorry,
mute.
you're on mute.
Thank you, sorry. The next screen where you talked about possible sites for a ground discharge,
Yes.
and you included the pollution, the facility as one of them. I thought we were too close to the river to do a ground discharge in that area, because we had considered doing something within the forest where the police facility could have been put. Does that make sense?
It
The
does,
land between
yes.
the land between the school and the Agawam River was deemed too close to the Agawam River to be a discharge point. So I was surprised to see the WPCF on this list as a possibility.
At this point, we're looking at the area that's outside of the 100-year flood and sensitive wetlands. And we're doing the initial investigations to see if the soils are suitable. And then through the
Great.
particle tracking, we'll be able to assess the environmental impact. Was it a?
So we have, sorry,
Oh, what
we
was
have-
the, yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
we
Sandy.
have eliminated the minot forest area by the school. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
And so this is the last step, or the last slide just summarizing next steps. So we'll continue to develop the alternatives analysis, which will include a no action alternative, so if nothing was done, and then look at alternatives for centralized collection, treatment, and discharge. And then also look at if there are opportunities for non-traditional technologies or the use of an innovative and alternative onset septic system program. So are there areas where you could have on-site systems instead of centralized, and that would be a more cost-effective alternative. We'll continue to review our findings with the CWMP advisory group, solicit comment, and then prepare them for public presentation and discussion as we move through the project. So I know we've talked through a lot of questions as we've been going through the presentation, but I wanted to see if there was any other questions or comments at this point.
Any questions or comments of our audience?
I do.
Just identify yourself, please.
My name's Betty Jean Leopold, and I live on 12 Linwood Ave. I live behind the sewer treatment plant, and it stinks like hell. And somebody put a big box near the pumping station, and nobody's telling me what that box is for. Are they gonna make it bigger? And guy wants to make an access road, and
Oh, excuse me, those are way out beyond what we're discussing here this evening, so,
you just asked me what my question was, I gave it to you. That's why I'm here.
okay, thank you.
So hopefully I get an answer tonight.
We're not prepared to do that. However, feel free to, if you would email me, and I'll get an answer for you. It just says to Wareham Commissioners at wareham.mass.us. I'll certainly answer your question.
Why, you want me to leave?
Oh, no, I'm pointing to the person next to you.
Sorry, good
Okay.
questions. Corin Peterson with the Buzzards Bay Coalition. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for allowing me to ask my questions. So are your alternatives considering limiting potential increase of the Agawam outfall to 2 MGD, or are you anticipating going to 3.5 MGD to meet the needs in the?
We'll look at both, likely 2 will be the practical limit.
Okay. And in order to get to 2, given the draft TMDL that just came out, the Agawam and Wareham already have too much nitrogen in it. If you're gonna add more through the wastewater treatment facility, you need to offset the new in addition to meeting environmental
Yes,
needs.
yes, so there will be a
that's the TMDL compliance plan.
Complete compliance plan, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
When you look for groundwater discharge places,
Yes.
does it have to be town or state-owned?
No.
So could we hypothetically come up with some sort of an incentive for these people that want to build solar farms to use the groundwater discharge under them? I'm
And
serious.
you would,
Oh, I know,
so
I
you
see,
would-
I'm thinking of, yeah, you slide it right
Yeah.
underneath.
You would maintain private, so then you would have municipal infrastructure on private property.
Oh, we could work
Which-
something
yeah.
out.
And if they're
I
amenable
mean,
to
if you-
having
if-
it maintained,
if-
that,
If
Potentially.
they're having a tough time getting the permit to do the solar because the town doesn't want it,
yeah.
and now if the town can use the land under it, maybe, considerations could be made.
Requires a lot of thought.
Yeah.
It does, so it's a good idea. I mean, let's just talk about some of the challenges. So if you, so we actually looked in one town at putting solar arrays on top of sand beds. Okay, so existing sand beds and then putting solar arrays on top. It ended up making it more, it's more expensive to put the solar arrays on top. You need to be able to get underneath and get
Foundations.
access, right? So so there's some complexities with that. If you just put the solar on the ground, you could put a subsurface system in, but then you would lose your access. So there's certainly some challenges associated with it.
But it just seems like these solar farms is just such a waste of property.
Yeah.
But you did, the one you
Sorry?
showed was an open field. The one you showed was an open field with the sand surface.
Yes.
Would that be perhaps a requirement of the construction? That'd be open and accessible? And would they need the
They
accessibility?
would, yes, so you do need to maintain it.
Yeah, but so that's nothing but pathways down
Yeah.
between.
Yeah. And honestly, the solar panels would shade the open sand beds and need to have less growth in them. So there are potential
They
advantages.
need to be serviced
Yeah.
as well.
I think it's working out that private municipal partnership, if that's a viable
Well,
option.
the thing is if we needed the land to do it,
Yeah,
and they wanted permission to
Yeah.
put their solar, they don't get it unless we get the ground rights.
Well,
Just
it's an
like
option.
air
it is
rights.
viable.
Yeah, it's an option we can add to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
list.
So just so you know, I mean, even though this is sand, when you add wastewater, even though it has a little bit of, even the nutrients are relatively low, you still get growth within the sand. And I'm only saying that because you gotta get in with a tractor and till that entire area, so that's the access that's.
What do you mean, every so often?
Yeah, I would say, I don't do it myself, so I don't know how often, every 3 months maybe,
Oh, well, okay,
You know,
maybe it wouldn't be as.
something like that.
Yeah, keep the growth
Yeah.
down.
It's it's a tractor with a, I don't
So
know if you know a
you
York
literally
rake.
have to be able to get under the solar. The
Yeah,
whole
that's
thing
right.
yeah, so they would
be-
have to be high so they
Yeah.
could drive
Yeah,
underneath.
and when we were
Okay.
looking at another facility, that tipped the cost equation into being
Ah,
not cost
okay,
effective.
I see your point.
If you look at how some of these solar arrays are put in, they're simple, like sometimes even just cinder blocks that hold them down. I mean, they're pretty inexpensive installations. So when you start to have to raise them up and put them on a structure, it
Yeah,
changes the
Helix
cost.
piers or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Anything, Bob?
No, I have nothing at this time.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to providing updates as the project progresses.
I find it interesting in that it goes into a more in depth that I'm familiar with as yet. I'm relatively new on the committee. But I find it interesting because we ourselves, as our charge is to explore the future needs of the plant and create plans to go forward with them. And I find this a good foundation to start, if nothing less than a discussion. Anything else, Peter?
I'm all set, thank you.
Sandy, do you have any
Thank you.
concerns, questions?
I'm all set, thank you very much.
Very good. I want to thank you very much
Thanks.
for your presentation.
Thank you.
There being nothing else on the agenda, just as an just to pass on information, today is the 21st. I have appointment with capital planning on the 27th. We have a joint meeting next Thursday on the 28th with the Bourne Sewer Commission. I've met with the chairman of the committee, and I think we're interjecting going forward. And we'll be discussing the contractual interaction that we have and responsibility we have to each other. It's not a negotiation for the contract. I mean, it's going to be off limit. I also have an appointment with the Finance Committee for October 11th. And our meeting, last meeting before town meeting will be on the 12th of October. So that being said, any further discussion?
Hearing none, I make a motion that we adjourn at 7:23.
Second,
Motion's made and seconded. There'll be no discussion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None. 4-0. Thank you very much.